What a way to start 2026. Not only do we already have a nice collection of high-tier finds so early in the new year, but one of those finds happened to be one of the most coveted and well-known pieces of lost media from the past couple years. If you haven't been following main lost media too closely, you might be thinking such a topic is related to a more modern piece of work, like Slamfest 99 or some cartoon pilot. But actually what we're talking about is an old piece of animation that dates back to the 1960s, and has remained a mystery for so many years. Myself and many others started to doubt that we would ever see it, for what seemed like circumstances out of our control. Over the past couple years, this search has been a roller coaster ride of emotions and controversy that have finally led to the full animation having been posted online in January 2026. But you might be asking yourself, what's so special about this piece of animation anyway, and why did it take so long to acquire? Well, due to an overwhelming demand that I give this topic its own spotlight, I have decided to pull it from the next found media video and discuss the history of Uncle Walt right here. How it slipped through our fingers so many times, and how it ended up finding its way online. I'm sure over the past couple weeks as of the time of this video, you've probably heard a lot of different stories and anecdotes about Uncle Walt, or heck, maybe even you remember when I covered the topic before in previous videos. It is a topic I was actually surprised to see a resurgence for at all, especially since I had always considered it to be an old, archaic article from the old wiki, first having been written all the way back in July 2013. In fact, for the longest time, we didn't even have any visuals from the animation at all, so readers would always be greeted by this image of the piece's creator, Robert Swarth, in front of this bright green background. Not to mention, there was little information about the short online at that point, with most of it being from other websites that discussed it. So from what we knew, Uncle Walt was the title of a 1964 cartoon made by Robert Swarth, when he was a student at UCLA, as part of an animation workshop. The premise of this animation is that it's supposed to be a dark take on the happy world of Disney, with claims that the animation depicts a graveyard sequence with headstones of Perry the Squirrel and her family, centaurs from Fantasia working in a red light district, and most famously, the 7 dwarves gathered around Mickey in a mouse mausoleum that parodies a scene from Snow White itself. Now, just from this short summary alone, it piqued the interest of a lot of animation and Disney fans, who wanted to witness such a dark piece. But back in 2013, it seemed unlikely that anyone would. At that time, the only documented public screening of this short took place at the American Film Institute in June 1972, as part of a 50 Years of Animation event. This genuine rarity of the film, on top of the fact that the animation was so old and mysterious, gave it that lost media allure. Over time, as lost media became more widespread online, more people would come across this article, where it would gain more recognition and interest from fans. But all that interest certainly didn't come quickly. Like I mentioned before, unless you were someone who browsed the old wiki, or were just really interested in Disney lost media, there's a good chance you hadn't come across this topic at all in the mid-2010s. From what I recall, the topic would often find its way into dark or banned lost media YouTube videos, but it was never something that got talked about a lot. In my opinion, Uncle Walt always seemed to be in the shadow of other dark Disney content, like the Mickey and Minnie adult animation. And considering we really had no way to get our hands on it, there was never really much to report about, other than what the wiki article stated. Just like with most independent creations that were shown very briefly publicly, Robert Swarth was likely the only person who would have had a copy of it, and if he hadn't released it by now, it was probably because he didn't want to. Actually, we did get confirmation of that from him, according to a Reddit user that contacted him years ago. He had no plans to ever release it. Not to mention, this exchange happened years before lost media became as popular as it would eventually be. So in the context of the modern day, it seemed even less likely that he would be interested in sharing it now that more people would be viewing it. The only other place that was sourced with a copy was the Academy Film Archive, but you can't view it, and there are no other images or information we can get from it. And this is basically the way Uncle Walt would stay for around a decade, just being one of those mythic pieces of lost media that you'll probably never see. It largely became forgotten. But maybe it was specifically because of how buried the topic became that it had that resurgence at all in the following years. Because in 2024, seemingly out of nowhere, the topic would be brought up in the Lost Media Wiki forums, in a way nobody expected it to be. In January 2024, a thread simply titled Uncle Walt was posted to the Lost Media Wiki section by Buddy Epster, and stated, "I've recently learned that there's an upcoming DVD made by a company by the name of Thunderbean, which features many Mickey Mouse shorts, official and unauthorized. In the description, it mentions that it contains this short film. They link a listing of the page, which lists a product called Public Domain Mouse Adventures, with a pencil sketch parody drawing of Mickey as the cover image. And if you scroll down on the listing, there is a description that reads in part, as the first year of Mickey Mouse cartoons will be in the public domain as of January 1st, here's a fun special set. I will include some really great reels of trailers from 35mm Technicolor prints, all 3 1928 Mickey shorts, additional mouse adventures from other studios, and some other complete rarities, including the infamous Uncle Walt short. At the time, I wasn't sure what to make of this. I hadn't heard of this company before, but the seemingly passing mention of Uncle Walt did not sound any alarms for me, as it's clear they were not trying to use a piece of lost media as leverage alone to try and sell the set. Apparently not everyone in the thread had heard about them before either. But fears were quickly quelled, as Thunderbean was indeed a legitimate company, who is known for their high-quality releases of old and hard-to-find cartoons. And it seemed as though in this case, they were simply celebrating early Mickey cartoons entering the public domain by doing a special DVD, along with Uncle Walt, for some reason. I guess just because they could. After the air was cleared, fans were ecstatic that they were finally going to get to see this piece of lost media after over a decade of waiting. But a pressing question soon came to the forefront of the forum. Where exactly did this copy of Uncle Walt come from? How was it that someone had found one copy after a decade without so much as a sighting, or even rumors that anyone in the wild had a copy? It was certainly intriguing to say the least, because as far as we knew, Robert Swarth was the only person with it. The only hint we got at the time was from the Blu-ray forums. I had a feeling we weren't going to get a clear answer due to the elusiveness of the short, but no matter the case, it seemed like it would only be a matter of time before it was unearthed. Everyone locked in their copies and waited for the April shipping date to arrive. And we waited, and waited, and waited, until eventually April became late May, and fans started questioning where the DVD was, as no updates had been given at that time. Someone in the forums claimed that Thunderbean release dates are to be taken with a grain of salt, as production delays and timing can be an issue, but that at that point it was unlikely copies would be going out in May. Yoshi Killer 2S added some insight to the situation, and claimed that originally the set was slated for the fall, but because of how well it sold, Thunderbean tried to expedite production. The higher volume of orders, combined with the fact that it was actually up for pre-order longer than most of Thunderbean's other sets, suggested it was just a matter of being swamped with demand. Shortly after, another user stated they had reached out to Thunderbean themselves, who said the finishing touches were being put on the sets and that orders would begin shipping very soon. Given all of the information we received up to that point, on top of the fact that mail was slow in the US around that time, given the holiday weekend, I was convinced we would be seeing them in early June. Thunderbean's website even updated to reflect this change. There was nothing to worry about. Then a few more weeks would follow, when the shipping date was changed once again to July. At this point, people were beginning to wonder if it really was just production delays that were causing the issue, or if there was something else behind the scenes that was preventing production from actually being completed. My biggest fear was that someone or something was holding up the clearance on Uncle Walt actually being pressed to disc, since we still didn't know where the copy of it came from, though Mod Wallet claimed it had been sourced from a private collection. At this point, the discussion kind of devolved into two camps: those who believed the DVD was coming out, and those who believed the delays were just leading up to an inevitable cancellation. And all this was right before the date was pushed back once again to August, which is when Buddy Epster updated the thread once again. As of August 3rd, Thunderbean said the set was almost ready for shipping, and another user got a similar response. So with the amount of time spent waiting for the set running out, it seemed like it would only be a matter of days before people either got these in their hands or they were just pulled entirely. Surely Thunderbean couldn't keep pushing back the date from month to month. In addition to the fact that they were claiming the set was nearly complete, which just didn't add up after a 5-month delay. Something was going to have to give. But little did we know it wouldn't even be from Thunderbean itself, and instead an eBay auction that changed the story entirely. In August 2025, only a few weeks before Thunderbean's public domain Mouse Adventure set was supposed to ship, a physical film reel of the long-lost Uncle Walt short appeared for sale out of nowhere. And I mean literally nowhere. I don't think anyone, myself included, was prepared for such a piece to resurface at a time like that. The auction itself was very clear with what it was selling. It wasn't trying to be sneaky about what the item really was, and the seller themselves had a lot of feedback, so everything seemed to check out. Not only that, but the most notable takeaway from the listing was a collection of never-before-seen brand new screenshots from the reel, proving both its authenticity but also that the reel worked. Like I said before, words could not describe how hype of a find this was at the time. But questions immediately began to circulate about the ramifications of this sale. Firstly, I was curious to know if this copy had any connection to Thunderbean, or the many delays in getting the public domain Mouse Adventure set released. The timing of this being put up for sale, just weeks before the set was supposed to ship, felt like way more than a coincidence to me. I postulated that it was possible Thunderbean might have run into production issues with their set, and wanted to offset those costs by selling the reel itself ahead of the set's release. But then the question on the opposite end of the spectrum reared its head. If this was not connected to Thunderbean's copy at all, should we even go ahead and attempt to win it in the first place? The Lost Media community knew for certain at that point that Mouse Adventures had been in production since January, and my worry was that if someone from the community did get this and released it ahead of the DVD set, it would essentially be stealing Thunderbean's, well, thunder. Sure, Thunderbean did not own Uncle Walt legally or anything, but I don't think it would have been a good look at all to beat them to the punch like that. But at the same time, Thunderbean had delayed their set so many times, a release was not guaranteed at that point. So my feeling towards it was maybe attempt to win the auction, give Thunderbean more time to release their set, and then if it ended up getting cancelled anyway, we'd have this as a backup. And while this was my general sentiment towards the situation at the time, the finances and bidding process were not handled by me at all, and I was told to keep quiet about it. So to avoid causing any conflict, I just sat back and let those who had found it first handle it. I'm not sure how much money I would have dropped on it. I think there were some brief negotiations about pooling funds together, but the bidding was ending only an hour or so after I had heard about it anyway. So I don't know who found this first or how it even remained a secret for all the time it was up. I guess maybe that could have been because there was certainly nothing in the auction that mentioned Thunderbean, the rarity or desirability of the short, besides a copy and paste section from the Lost Media Wiki article. So unless you were looking for this, I guess maybe you wouldn't have come across it. No matter the case, I watched the auction end for around $170 and was informed that the wiki did not end up with it. Then I turned back to Thunderbean and hope they can deliver. Nobody else in the community at the time came forward claiming they had secured this copy. So all that was really left to do was wait for Thunderbean, which, like I said before, also quelled any worries I had with controversies that might have been caused from the wiki having the reel ahead of Thunderbean's release. And actually, signs were looking very promising at that point. A user in the forums named Thunderbean, which we did verify was an official company account, posted even more new screenshots of the restoration work they had done on their own copy. This was followed by an announcement on their website that copies would be shipping September 1st. The clear visual progress, a new release date, and maybe even some urgency in getting their set out first now knowing that a new copy is floating around out there with an unknown party, no matter how you looked at it, it seemed like only a matter of time before those DVDs would ship. There was nothing stopping Thunderbean, and if there was ever a time to do it, it would certainly be now. Until it didn't happen, and shit hit the fan. In late August, just a couple weeks after the eBay auction, Thunderbean pulled the public domain Mouse Adventures listing from their website, and went as far as to issue refunds to everyone that had pre-ordered it. That was it. The release was cancelled. Uncle Walt would not be coming out. This flabbergasted the Lost Media community as well as myself, because it seemed to happen for no reason. For 9 months we had been following the updates with this release, and then suddenly, following restoration screenshots and an eBay listing with a reel, they pulled it. Speculation ran amok at this time, with no one knowing for sure why this happened. My theory at the time was that it had something to do with Robert Swarth behind the scenes, considering we still didn't know of his involvement with this release or any knowledge of it. I thought it was possible that after the eBay auction made the rounds, Robert became more privy to the information about Thunderbean's set and stopped it from coming out. Hell, maybe he even bought the eBay reel in an effort to collect every copy that's out there. Because remember, he said before he did not want this getting out. But that was just my thought, and everyone seemed to have their own 2 cents to throw at it, which quickly fizzled into controversy and drama. The decision to pull Uncle Walt was not only a turning point in the effort to get the animation, but it created an outlet for directionless anger to unfold, most notably at the Lost Media Wiki and myself, because it just wouldn't be a juicy Lost Media controversy without pointing the finger. For some reason, the court of public opinion decided that Uncle Walt being pulled was the result of our rhetoric to not support the public domain Mouse Adventures release. Apparently the public had decided that users on the Lost Media Wiki forums were conspiring to buy one copy of the DVD, rip it, and then share it between each other. And also that by me talking about Uncle Walt on my live streams, I was somehow disrespecting Thunderbean and disincentivizing viewers to not actually buy the DVD. I literally have no idea how people came to this conclusion other than the fact that they wanted someone to be angry at. I remember going on Twitter that night and having to make several defensive tweets clearing the air for what was really happening because it was just chaos. And you might be asking, where was Thunderbean during all of this? How were they reacting to it? And well, they were getting their fair share of hate too. Not in the same way we were, but more so outright being blamed for pulling it. People were furious at them, and it took a while for any statement on the matter to be released. Like I said before, from my observations, it seemed like the public consensus had largely been that Thunderbean pulled it because they caught wind that the wiki was going to rip one copy and share it, which is not true. The only public discussion that ever happened about Uncle Walt within the Lost Media community was in this thread, and nowhere in it was this statement expressed. Sure, some people do passively mention that they hope someone posts it, but it's never suggested that we were going to conspire to undercut the efforts of Thunderbean. People like to improperly frame this sentiment with that of Buster Bear, another lost cartoon that Thunderbean had planned to release, which was obtained and leaked early because someone contacted the company and lied about having an illness. That's not even remotely close to the possibilities of Uncle Walt finding its way online through one of us buying a DVD. And this is even exemplified by a comment made from Thunderbean back in June of that year, making no mention or plea that we not rip the contents. Literally the third comment in this thread makes a passing statement that they hope someone posts it. And the reality of the situation is, no matter how badly you don't want to believe it, even if the Lost Media Wiki or any of its users were not going to rip this whatsoever, someone else was going to. There was no way this was not going to make its way online, and Thunderbean must have known that. And indeed, it did, because later that night after much of the drama had cooled down, Thunderbean, who is headed by Steve, made a return visit to the Lost Media Wiki thread, and explained what exactly had happened through a couple of different posts. They read in part, "The decision was only made a few days ago, and was a hard decision to make. We were all set to release the set with it on there. I would have said something much earlier if there had been an earlier decision. We're losing everything we had invested in the film with the decision as well, so there is a financial loss. Wish I could say more to stop any speculation. This is literally the most I can say without revealing the reasons. I know there is disappointment and anger because of this. I'm sorry for that. I can say the decision was not directly related to the wiki community or anything posted here. It's also not related to anything involving the Disney company directly. Additionally, it was mentioned that they did have an excess of orders, totaling around 240, which is higher than the usual 80 to 100 they get. So even if the public wanted to believe the wiki or myself disgraced Thunderbean's efforts, we still helped the company sell more than double what they usually do, just by talking about the project. It concludes by stating that Thunderbean will not disclose where their copy came from, how many other copies are out there, or if Steve knew who bought the eBay one. The thread would linger for a couple more weeks, but largely be unproductive. And that was basically it. The anticipation and hype surrounding Uncle Walt that seemed to build over the months dissipated in September, and largely fell back into obscurity from which it came. Sure, the topic was still on people's minds, and I would check eBay for a new copy when I remembered, but it was largely a footnote in 2024 lost media by the end of the year. But as is a common theme in the search for lost media, you never know when or how something is going to show up. And would you believe it, following the August 2024 auction, a new chance for the taking would appear in February 2025. Once again, to everyone's surprise, yet another Uncle Walt reel showed up on eBay. But unfortunately, things would not be as quiet with this one as the first one. Unlike the first reel, which came up at a time when the topic was still largely unknown, following the immense amount of drama and coverage the topic got, it was now a valuable, publicly recognizable piece that had eluded release twice already. Surely this third chance was not going to come easy, and oh boy, it did not. Already, the starting bid was close to the final selling price of the first reel. And this doesn't even consider factors such as if this was the first reel being resold for a profit, or if it's a completely new one that showed up. Or maybe Thunderbean finally decided to sell theirs and wash their hands of the whole ordeal. According to records, the listing climbed up as high as $700 before being abruptly pulled and then relisted for $4,000. This became known as the infamous $4,000 Uncle Walt, because at that point, it definitely seemed like this was a backdoor deal, and that was by far the consensus. Someone with a lot of money, knowing the desirability of the short, probably decided to send the seller an offer to end the auction early and to buy it outright. And it worked, because that copy was gone quicker than it was listed, and I don't think I even saw it before it sold. It felt more than likely that every copy of Uncle Walt would be scooped up this way, and I think at that point everyone was just so tired of the shenanigans like this that they gave up on it. For nearly the entirety of 2025, Uncle Walt was forgotten. But then, almost a full year later in January 2026, that film reel from a year prior would show itself again. Except this time, it wasn't in the form of an auction. In fact, it wasn't even a physical copy, and instead, it was the actual short. A digitized, full copy of Uncle Walt had resurfaced online without any preparation or warning on the YouTube channel of Unky NPC. This blew our minds and quickly made the rounds in the community, and my channel comments too. Just as I never expected to see the original reel back in 2024, I couldn't believe a copy reappeared without any strings attached. In my shock, I started to wonder if this was even legit at all, or some kind of elaborate hoax, as fake lost media mixed with AI are becoming a huge problem nowadays. But nope, it was indeed authentic. Unknown to anyone at the time, Unky NPC was the buyer of the $4,000 listing, though it was not actually sold for $4,000, and instead a best offer was accepted. According to Unky, the short actually sold for $950, with the listing being so high just to ensure that they would be the one to purchase it. $950 is not even that far off from the $700 it was already at.
so I'm surprised the seller didn't let the auction complete its run. But this was just the beginning of the story, because all throughout 2025, when we thought nothing was happening with the film, it actually was behind the scenes. Unki and PC released a video on their own channel documenting their search effort, and gets into the specifics for how everything went down. But to summarize for our timeline, after the short was obtained and digitized, they reached out to Steve from Thunderbean to discuss a possible release. This was not only to ensure that the right channels were navigated, but it was also to get Robert Swarth himself on board. And in doing this, it actually revealed some valuable information that we had only speculated on years ago. According to Steve during this exchange with Unki, yes, it was Robert all along who was hesitant to allow Uncle Walt to be released in public domain mouse adventures. I'm not surprised to hear that Robert did know about the project all along, though I'm not sure at what point in the timeline he became aware of it, or at what point in advance that knowledge influenced the decision to cancel it. Though now there was a new opportunity to do it again, especially since Robert had a lot of other lost and unreleased work. The original plan was to collaborate between Unki, Steve, and Robert to get a release happening of all of Robert's work. But unfortunately, as explained in the video, that just didn't quite come together after Robert stopped responding. At that point, Unki felt like they had no other choice than to release the short, and that's how the copy finally made its way online. In a question asked to Steve after its initial upload, he reiterates that he had nothing to do with the upload himself, proving that the collab really didn't happen. Now in 2026, we have Uncle Walt online, 13 years after the Lost Media Wiki article was first created, and 2 years after the first hints that Thunderbean had a copy were posted. The search is over, though it's unclear if Thunderbean will ever go through with a release of their own, as Steve had done a lot of work restoring his copy already, or what reaction Robert has to all of this unfolding. Perhaps an official release is still possible, as I'm sure collectors would support a physical release of it, as it's a more tangible way to own the media, even though the short is now accessible to everyone. But what is certain is that the short's unearthing was definitely unpredictable, and concludes one of the most infamous pieces of animation within the history of lost media.